X DAO podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deus Ex DAO podcast, a place where some of the most progressive and innovative builders, thought leaders, and traders in the crypto space come together to discuss all areas of the crypto industry. Whether you're into DeFi, Layer 1s, Layer 2s, NFTs, or anything in between, we've got you covered. And as a reminder, nothing said on this podcast should be construed as financial advice or as a solicitation to buy or sell any digital asset or security. The comments, views, and opinions expressed by the hosts or guests on the podcast are their own. As always, you'll need to do your own research. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to the episode.
All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the Deus Ex DAO podcast. I'm Nitehawks. And along with my co-host, Ace, we're excited to welcome our guest, Simon Judd, from the Index Co-op community to the show today. Ace and I are both core members of Deus Ex DAO, which is an invite-only decentralized investment syndicate of crypto-focused individuals. We have a lot to cover today. We want to learn about Simon's crypto journey and his background and what brought him to Index Co-op and helped build that community out into what it is today. And what we want to focus mainly, though, on is DAOs in general and what it's like working in a DAO, what it's like bringing a DAO into well-developed organization and community, and what it is to where are the pain points, what are the benefits, and where do we see DAOs going in the future? And also, what are the hiring and recruiting process like is in that world in comparison to the traditional finance world or traditional corporate world? But before we get into all that, Simon, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Nitehawks, Ace, awesome to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm stoked for this one.
Awesome. Cool, man. Can you give us just a little bit about your background, your crypto origin story, and sort of how you found yourself where you are today in the crypto world?
Yeah. So I, it's a great journey. I, graduated university with a degree in philosophy, and after I graduated, I joined the United States Marine Corp as an infantry officer. I spent 6 years in the Marines. Had just an awesome experience there, and towards the end of my career, I remember really distinctly, I'd just gotten back from deployment in like 2017. And I was stationed in Hawaii at the time. And I remember I would like my Marines were like cleaning their weapons after deployment. They were getting ready to tournament. And they were all like talking to like, hey, did you see this thing, Ethereum? It went like 100x. And, there's this other coin and we traded it. And like they were starting to get super fired up because it was like right at the start of the bull market. And I remember I was like, what are these guys talking about? What is this? So I went home and we had like 3 weeks off after deployment. So I spent those entire 3 weeks just like diving into the Ethereum community, learning everything about it, buying as much as I could at the top of the bull market. But at the time I really didn't have the context to understand what was going on. I didn't have a very, strong background in technology. I didn't have a ton of exposure to finance. So I was very outside looking in. You fast forward a year or two, I got out of the Marines and I went to NYU for business school. And at NYU, I was really focused on becoming just like this great investment banker, right? And I was dived really into finance, got really, really into finance. And I spent the summer of 2020 working at a investment bank doing technology M&A. And that was the same time DeFi summer was popping off. And I remember all the time I was supposed to spend doing Excel models about these TradFi companies, I was spending just diving into Yearn and Sushi Swap and getting really into it. So I got back to my second year of business school, and I remember there was a point in October or November where I was like, hey, if I don't pursue crypto as my life full time right now, I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life trying to get involved in this space. And so I made a really conscious decision that I was going to go all in on crypto. I was going to make it my life. I ended up discovering a couple of just great communities right off the bat, like Badger DAO, Index Co-op, getting really involved. And, within like 2 or 3 weeks of working in those DAOs, I was like, this is all I want to do. This is the future. So I turned down my investment banking job. And since then, it's just been like the ride of a lifetime.
Wow. That sounds like a familiar journey to a lot of people that got DeFi pilled in, middle 2020, late 2020. And congrats to you for taking the plunge. Do you have any kind of like, were there any kind of fears or people that are telling you shouldn't go for it at that time? And, what kind of internal struggles did you go through before saying, you know what, I'm going to go into the new frontier and venture into this unexplored and unproven space as a full-time crypto, or I should say DAO member employee?
That's like a fascinating question, because it's like the space has changed a lot, right? And like now, leaving a job to get work in crypto is very different than it was 2 years ago. So I remember very distinctly, I was in Manhattan. It was the fall of 2020, and I was like just really diving in. But like none of my friends were really into crypto. It wasn't like really a mainstream thing that people were doing. And I remember, so it was like mid-October, mid-November, I made the decision. I said, hey, like, if I'm going to do crypto, I need to like be in an environment where all I'm doing is crypto every day. So I made the decision to like move out of Manhattan, and I moved to Mexico for that entire year, and really spent like every single day just doing crypto. And I like really, it was a conscious effort. Like I was like, I do not want to just be talking to people who are like crypto skeptical, or like spend all my time convincing people how great crypto is. Cause like people go wrong there, right? Like you spend all your time convincing your non-crypto friends when you should be spending all your time with like crypto friends. And that was like a real make or break for me. It was just saying, hey, like I'm going to dedicate like every day to like learning about this and doing this and being involved in this. And I'm going to like structure my life around it.
That's wild. Yeah, especially living in Mexico, I guess you're kind of in your own head, and there's like on the one hand, it's a good thing because you're in control of your decisions, and if you have that conviction, like there's nothing that could stop you. On the other hand, there's like nobody to perhaps provide another perspective, and maybe that's like a good thing. If you're gonna go all in on something, it might be the better route to just have no distractions. I'm curious, like when you discovered Index Co-op, what was that? Contrast that, in early days to say how things have developed over, say the last couple of years. What was Index DAO like? How did you even get in there initially, and what was it that drew you to the community?
So at the time, there were a couple like communities that were starting to like get off the ground. So, you think like Yearn was like really, the first kind of DeFi focused DAO that really spun up, and that brought a lot of people in. But by like, fall 2020, that was pretty established. Same with SushiSwap. And, at the time it seemed like there were these up and coming DAOs that like really weren't like, there weren't that many people involved. It was just kind of, one or two big posters, one or two people involved. And it seemed like, from my perspective at the time, I was like, hey, if you want find a place that you can really make an impact, you want to go somewhere where it's like still kind of early, where it's still developing, and you can really like shape it. So, in the fall 2020 at the Index Co-op community, there were probably 4 or 5 people that were posting on the forum. The community had just been launched. It was very nascent. We hadn't even started doing community calls. And then like, I remember saying, as I was getting involved with the community, I was like, there's so much runway here. You can do anything with this. And that's what really drew me to it.
That's really neat. And it's cool because you come to it from a different sort of perspective. I mean, I was, and Ace, I think you were too, participated in DeFi Summer. And I think that most people were, constantly hunting for something that looked undervalued, or that the average crypto degenerate, let's say, is out there hunting for something they think is undervalued that they're going to make some money on, rather than, and your focus seems to be totally on communities that have potential to grow and where you can make serious contributions. So that's go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a bet on yourself, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I think there's a bunch of different, when I think of the DeFi ecosystem, there's a bunch of different players, and like there's people who invest, there's people who like build DAOs, there's people who do these different things. And I think the idea of being at like finding like a really early stage project is you can say, hey, like this is so small and the community is so small, like the number of tokens in circulation is so small that like I personally can have this huge outsized impact on like the value of the token. And like that's a really powerful realization, like going from the point where you're just like, okay, I'm just looking at the values go up or down, and I'm like trying to see like where the value, why the value, what's driving it, to being like, I am going to be the force that is driving that value.
So you mentioned there you saw a lot of runway, and I imagine there wasn't a whole lot of structure in terms of who was responsible for what, and a lot of tasks to complete, or a lot of ideas as far as how you could spend your time to create value. For you as a community member, how did you get started? Like where did you see the opportunity for yourself to contribute? Is that something that somebody requested of the community, or is it something you just sort of offered up to contribute?
So I started just doing like the basics of the basics. Like we needed an FAQ. So, I helped write the FAQ. We needed like slide decks for a weekly meeting. So I started putting together the slide decks. And that, I just gotten done with doing a lot of stuff with finance and investment banking. So like I found like that part to be pretty natural. Like, okay, put together a slide deck, figure out what like some of the business plan is. And then it just spiraled from there. Like, I started to get really involved with our business development efforts. I started getting really involved with our fundraising, and was able just to kind of really identify like where the gaps were and just try and fill those gaps.
How does fundraising work for a DAO? Like, where are you going to get the investors? Is that just open market token buyers, or are you looking at more institutional investor types?
So we, throughout like the winter and spring of 2021, our entire treasury was Index Co-op governance tokens. And myself and a few community members at that time realized like, hey, this isn't going to be sustainable in a bear market. Like if prices go way down, like we're going to really struggle to like survive as a DAO. So in spring of 2021, myself and a few other community members basically put together a proposal, said, hey, like we're going to do a private token sale to a number of different investors at a certain discount to spot. And, we're going to gather stable coins from those investors. And that's going to be like our runway for the next year or two. So from there, it really worked like a pretty traditional fundraise, put together a pitch deck, spoke to like, 50 investors over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. And, we're lucky to get, a number of really, really good teams on board.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, clearly you guys made I guess you made a good decision for the DAO and also, for the buyers of those tokens. It seems like they're really, well, I don't want to jinx it, but there hasn't been a terrible bear market quite yet. So it's a win-win. Yeah. So I guess the next piece that I'm curious in learning about is, as a core member of a DAO, what would it be like? What type of things you would look for from a community member, and if they'd like to get involved? Like, how do they get in there? First of all, did you guys have a process for that, or is it mostly just like, hey, I showed up in the Discord and said, I want to help? How did it work at Index?
I think it's the type of thing that really evolves over time. So, when we first started out, it was very much like there was no process. It was show up in the Discord and make as much noise as possible. And, over the last 18 months, the community's really refined that to this really efficient onboarding process where, there's a new joiner call that people go to, they sign up, they do certain tasks, they get, deeper and deeper into the DAO. But at the end of the day, like what I tell people about getting involved with the DAO and like what it takes is like, you just have to be relentless. You can't take no for an answer. Like I talk to so many community members who, they'll reach out to me and they'll say, hey, Simon, like I'm, just discovered crypto, just discovered this DAO. How do I help out? So I'll do a phone call with them. And what I tell them is I say, hey, spend like 3 months just building context, learn about what's going on, talk to as many people as possible, and like come back to me at the end of the 3 months and like, we'll see where you're at. And without fail, they'll disappear for 3 months. I won't hear from them. And then they'll come back like 3 months later being like, Simon, all I've done is like read about this, this, and this. Like I've been, talking to all these people. I'm working on like 5 things in the DAO. I'm like super involved. I just quit my job. So it's a cool process, but it starts with just like learning about it and like really gaining context.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like you really weed out kind of the part-timers versus the people that are all in from the start. If they have to make a lot of noise, they have to do the homework, they have to be observers and really absorb the culture, they're going to be, probably in the right mindset to contribute or like chomping at the bit after that quote 3 month, trial period is over.
It's kind of like an internship, right? Like we, everybody, it's like you couldn't show up at like a normal company and like immediately start driving like CEO level decisions on day one, right? Like you just don't know what's going on. You don't have the context. But the cool thing about the DAO is like after those 3 months, if you're really good, you can drive like CEO level decisions. It's just like everybody has to go through that process of getting up to speed.
That is a super fascinating point to make because I think, interestingly, I'm the only person in the call here that has had like corporate job experience. I mean, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but Simon, it sounds like you did some work for an investment bank, but you didn't do that full time, right?
Yeah, like 8 weeks of corporate.
Okay. So I always thought as a full-time employee, both from, a new hire perspective or hiring someone is, wouldn't it be better to sort of have a trial coworker for 6 months just to see, is it the right cultural fit? Is it somebody I wouldn't mind sitting next to, even virtually for the next X years of my life? Are they going to put in the time? Are they going to be there when you need them to be like as a dependable colleague? Those are things that in the, I guess Web 2 or the corporate working model, we never had the opportunity to really get. So it's interesting that you contrast that kind of from the Web 3 or from a DAO perspective, where it's very much an opt-in model. Like they have to really want to be there. They have to demonstrate that they can, contribute. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it's like there's no like commitment. You can just like wipe your hands. Either side can say, this isn't working, and like obviously there's no HR to step in, right, to to clean up the mess. So that's a really interesting point you make about that trial.
100%. Like if you think about TradFi or like Web 2.0, like that's why there's such a huge emphasis on credentials, right? Because you don't have like a really good way of getting people involved without like hiring them into the company. So like the way you screen people is you say, hey, you went to X school, you went to Y school, you had, these grades, you did this, like we can, be more confident that you'll fit in here. But even then it's not a very good heuristic.
Absolutely. In terms of credentials, like that's a huge, I would say, weakness for a lot of Web3 curious or even Web3 experienced, in terms of like, we don't have the greatest like resume tools. I mean, we're starting to see stuff developed out of like on-chain data. So where have you interacted in terms of like governance participation? Where'd you get rugged? Like, so like the degen blue stuff is super cool, having a degen score. But like beyond those kind of on-chain metrics, like, did you see resumes that, were very kind of TradFi or Web2 reminiscent? Or did you see stuff that was more focused on Web3? And like, how would you recommend people kind of prepare themselves beyond just showing up and doing the work? Like, what would impress you or draw you to somebody from a credentials perspective?
So I think the credentials question is a really good question, and I've really my perspective on it's evolved a lot over time. I really see crypto and like DeFi. It's like a meta game, right? And there's different ways of playing the game, and there's different ways of interacting with the game. And like if you think about, so say you're like one of the best Counter-Strike players or like Call of Duty players in the world. You probably have like a in-game resume, right? It's like your kill streaks, like how many games you've won, stuff like that. But when you throw somebody into a new game, like a new Call of Duty game, like nobody's checking like what that player's resume is, right? They're just like, that guy's sick, he's crushing it. And like that's like kind of the beauty of Web3 is like you're not so much judged on your background, but you're judged on your like ability to play the game. And like I see a lot of different resumes, I see a lot of different backgrounds, and I see people with sterling resumes just kind of like fail at Web3 and not be good because they haven't spent the time like learning how to play the game and getting good at playing the game of DeFi or crypto. So the things that really impress me is like when somebody comes and, maybe they have a great background, maybe I don't even know their background, but they're able to like pick up the information and start like running with it and taking initiative like very quickly. Like that's what stands out.
Yeah, that's neat. And it kind of shows that the DAO structure flips the incentives set up in the traditional corporate world sort of on its head. Because in DAOs, you have this situation where people come in and it's all about what sort of initiative are they taking here and now, and what is their, performance off of that initiative here and now. And if, it's strong, then, those incentives come, and credentials really don't matter. It's about what they do. So that's really neat.
Cause it's so meritocratic, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I think about this a lot with my own career in crypto or my own, my journey through it. So like, I've been doing this for almost 2 years, right? It's not all like you're crushing it every day or like every day you're just like driving the most amazing thing. And I know like when I get frustrated personally, like, oh, I'm not accomplishing what I want to do, I'm not like where I want to be. Like you have to view it as like, oh, like this is like a signal to get better. Like this is a signal to improve, to get better at like the game of crypto. It's not because like if you're better, it will come. If you get really good, it does come. And it's just like you just kind of have to focus on what you can control.
I was just gonna say the concept of kind of decentralized, I want to say like decentralized LinkedIn or decentralized job review, is really starting to speak to me after hearing what you have to say. Like if there was a way for, your peers to build your reputation and have incentives to be truthful and, participate, like that could be extremely powerful. I know there's some pretty cool, like decentralized communities that are being built, like gm.xyz. And eventually there's going to be a token, but it's something that I'm starting to like, my wheels are starting to turn. I have a feeling, Simon, it's something you spent a lot of time on, being, a DAO member. But like how, what kind of DAO tooling do you see like as a huge gap I know you probably were involved with every, day-to-day function of a DAO, from like the finance to communication to business development, et cetera, et cetera. So what do you see as like some of the hugest gaps for DAO tooling?
So I think my thoughts on DAO tooling have evolved a lot. Last year I was very like minimalist with it. I said, we have the tools we have. Like, let's not overcomplicate things. Like, we don't need that much more stuff. But increasingly, I see it as like DAO tooling is like the software layer of abstraction that exists on top of these communities. And you need that layer of abstraction to like allow people to like normal people to interface with it and interact with the technology. Because it's like, if it's all just a multi-sig and like a random Telegram channel, like, yes, your 10 insiders are going to be able to figure it out and they're going to be able to drive value, but like nobody else is. And we're at the point in crypto where I think it's really dangerous to establish these communities around like just like 10 like super crypto insiders who've already made it, right? Because at that point, they're already working on other projects. They have their own things going. They're like hustling across the board. Like, they're not going to be able to provide that like level of momentum and energy that, somebody who's a little newer to the space is going to be able to provide. Like, they might have the experience, but like you need to be able to harness like the thousands of people that are coming into this every day. And that's what DAO tooling does.
So it sounds to me like you're a fan of kind of broad communication medium, and broad participation. And what worked for Index? If somebody wasn't able to keep up with the Discord or Telegram channel on a daily basis, like how are you able to engage sort of the not full-time DAO members or community members, and continuously get good feedback and contributions? What media worked for you?
So I think when you think about how so something I think about a lot is like how energy builds in crypto, right? And how like certain projects gain, or like a DAO gains momentum. And I like, when I think about it, it's like there's really three main mediums that exist in crypto where like communication is shared. You have Telegram, you have Discord, and you have Twitter. And all three like have a very different purpose and a different use, and need to get leveraged in the right way, like as a DAO grows. So like Telegram is like, I don't know how into Telegram you are, but like you can get super sucked into like one channel in Telegram. Like you can get like 10, 20 people on that one channel and just be like, the momentum just builds, right? So when I think of how a DAO starts, like it kind of starts in these really small private channels that are like 10 people just like really hashing out an idea. And then it kind of moves to Discord, and Discord's like where the magic happens, right? Like that's where the community comes together. That's where like you start getting new people in. That's where like a lot of information is shared. It's like projects are getting spun up. Like that's where the magic is. And then, you move to Twitter, where it's much more of like a broadcast platform, right? You're like bringing, you're evangelizing your message to the broadest possible like group. And, for a DAO to be really successful, you have to do all three really well. You have to like harness a ton of energy in like a small chat, and just like, you can't let that dissipate. You can't just go to Twitter and tell everybody about it. You have to like build the energy. And then you have to like, create the magic in the Discord. You have to create that community, that environment, like that game that people can play for hours on end every day. And then from there, you have to be able to evangelize it across like the broader community, like the broader communication channels like Twitter, and start to like really bring people in and keep people up to date.
Interesting.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah. So like, in terms of Index Co-op, like the community has obviously grown a ton. The DAO itself, in terms of its organization structure, has blossomed and grown a ton. Like, how is has it been difficult in terms of all of the different decision making within the DAO and ensuring that things are moving forward in a meaningful way and in an efficient way? How has that been going in line with the scaling of the DAO? I mean, I imagine there's been some difficulty in ensuring all community members are aware of what's happening in one working group. And I'm saying working group because I've looked through some of the Index Co-op documents to see that you have multiple working groups. So if you could just talk about communication within the DAO and sort of the pain points there and difficulties and where it's worked a little bit.
So DAOs move at like the speed of governance. So if you think about like how a traditional corporation moves, like the cadence is set by the quarterly board meetings, right? Or the investor calls. And that's kind of like what everything in a traditional corporation orients off of. When you think of a DAO, everything orients off of governance and votes. And you can only really move as fast in the DAO as the pace of is your governance cadence. And that becomes very difficult to manage as you start to like move really fast with these organizations, because there's a lot of decisions that maybe need votes, maybe don't need votes, but are like being raised to the community, and like becomes very difficult for like the average person to keep up with all the decisions that need to be made across the organization. And like, this is a huge pain point at Index Co-op. It's a huge pain point across basically every large DAO. It's like, what decisions do we need the entire community to like make? And what decisions like need to be made at like a smaller level and don't need like full community oversight? We're still very much like honing in on that. And I think like that's going to be the difference maker between like a really successful DAO and a less successful DAO. It's like, how do you, speed up the decision making and also make sure that like the right decisions are getting highlighted at the right level?
Yeah, it's almost like what needs to be on chain versus where can you delegate responsibility to just, move fast and break things.
Totally.
Like, picking on that question a little bit, what do you think about, the role of a token in proposing new governance initiatives? Obviously, the majority of DAO governance is, determined by the number of votes, and that's typically based on how many tokens an individual has or has locked. But what about, the actual role of a token in proposing initiatives? Is that something that you guys have thought about, or maybe something personally you've considered? If that person doesn't have enough of skin in the game, they shouldn't even be able to say, come up with this idea that we need to take to vote.
Yeah. So, I mean, at one level, I think we way over index on just like voting in general and like using tokens as a voting mechanism. And we try and like force voting like too early in the process. Like, I think like a DAO that's like 6 months old, like there shouldn't be 1 million token votes, right? Like there maybe 1 or 2 every month, but like you don't need to vote on every decision. When it comes to gating like proposals with token votes, I think that's very effective, right? Like I think we absolutely like, if you want to be making big decisions for a project, like you need like a baseline, a base layer of ownership in that project. However, what we do see is like a random person who just joined the Discord and has like 10 tokens, they don't have like the context to make a really impactful like governance decision. And even if they propose it, like there's so many people with high context and high ownership that like those proposals don't really get anywhere. Like you really need everybody on board to get a good proposal going.
Sure. Yeah, I could also have the liquidity creates a problem too. It's like people can come and go as they please, and a token it didn't necessarily demonstrate expertise or experience. So I see what you mean.
And well, it's interesting, like how like I think we have this idea that like DAOs need to vote on everything, and just because like you can vote doesn't mean you should vote. And we tend to like DAOs across the ecosystem like tend to overvote. Like it's a huge problem. Like when you think about the company you were at, Ace, previously, like how many times did you vote on things, even if it was like just a team that was working on like some aspect of the company? Like you weren't voting on every decision.
No.
And like voting by itself is like, it's something we do, but it's not like inherently valuable.
Right. It's sort of just an expected function of holding a token and being part of a Web3 company. But no, it's a good rhetorical question. I don't think I ever had a say in a lot of decisions that were made, or I had the only say in a lot of decisions that were made. So delegating responsibility to those who are the most informed often could be the most effective way to govern. So now that you've been in Web3 for a couple of years, what were the roles, or I would say like responsibilities, that Index DAO was always looking for help? Like where were their human resource needs? And for people that are preparing to kind of take the jump, or maybe offer some of their time to working in Web3, like what are the major skill sets that are lacking? And I guess any kind of color or advice for folks who are looking to make that jump.
So DAOs are lacking like every skill set in the world that you could name, are things that we need. And like I tell new community members as they join, like I'm like, don't find like what the DAO wants you to do, because the DAO is not going to tell you what it wants you to do. Find like what you're most passionate about in the DAO and do that. And like that's where people get really successful, is like when they find like what they love to do in the DAO and are able to run with it. Like I'm not an accountant. I don't love accounting, but there's guys in the DAO who love nothing more than, building out Excel models and doing the accounting. And they're incredible at it. And that's like what the DAO does so well, is it allows individuals like not to be put in a box, but to find like what they're passionate about and do it. And it's like people like very much like, okay, I only have this skill set. Like unless this skill set like translates one-to-one to like what the DAO needs, like I won't be able to work in the DAO. But it's like there are no skill sets that translate one-to-one to what the DAO needs. Like you have to create those skill sets and you have to implement them in the DAO.
Yeah, like from your firsthand experience, what were some of the things that you did that you say you would never have imagined having to do? Coming from like a philosophy and investment banking background, like were you doing any web development, or I don't know, graphic design? Like what were some of the things that you had to or chose to participate in that you wouldn't have into the traditional world?
A huge area for me has been focusing on like our international development and like bringing in like different communities like from across like the world and getting them really involved. So it's like, last summer I was doing like an AMA with a Crypto Africa group, and there are like 10,000 people on it asking me about crypto. And that's the type of thing that you would never like no DAO is like, nobody's going to say, hey, like we need a guy to go do like, AMAs in Malaysia and Africa and China and like get these people involved. Right. Like that's not the type of like, nobody would even think about that. But, it just kind of popped up. It was a need. And like, we've seen tremendous international growth from, the effort that a lot of people have made to like reach out to these communities and like build relationships there. And like that's like a great example of just kind of like finding an area where you can exert some leverage and just pushing.
That's really incredible. You said 10,000 people on a call?
It was crazy. It was absolutely insane.
And I imagine you were up at like I don't know, midnight or something delivering that.
Exactly. It's like midnight, middle of the night. You have all, and like they use totally different emojis. They're asking totally different questions. They have a totally different perspective. And it's so fun. It's so cool.
Yeah, and it's funny you say like the emojis culture is different, because I recall working for a company that was Finnish, and we had to go through cultural training every year. You know, the way people speak to you or interact with you are different, and you couldn't get offended and you had to be understanding. But learning how to communicate on a cultural level in Web3, I mean, talk about new web tooling right there, or DAO tooling right there. That's wild.
Totally. Like you'll be talking to like a team in China, and like every single emoji they use is totally different than the emojis you use. And you're like, wait, how do I like, what am I supposed to send? And then you figure it out.
Yeah, it's like, is it validation, or did I really just drop the ball? Like, what does this mean?
Emoji culture. Yeah, I never thought about that. There's definitely differing emoji cultures.
When emoji DAO, because I'm in.
Simon, I want to ask you, so within the Index DAO, like in practice, we've talked about people coming in, showing initiative, making meaningful contributions, but there's got to be some sort of incentive for them to do that. And I assume it comes in some form of compensation. Like, how does that work within Index? You have someone that comes in, they start making great contributions, they're showing initiative, they've been there for a good while. Like, do they receive some form of compensation? Are there people within the DAO that are working full time for Index, and how are they paid? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So initially when we started, since it was so small, what would happen is all the contributors would like submit like a sheet at the end of every month of saying, hey, this is what I did for Index Co-op. And that worked very well when we had like 10 or 20 people, and it was like very easy to allocate that. In I think March of last year, we brought on 4 full-time contributors, myself included, and those contributors were paid like a monthly stipend worth of Index, and then had like a certain amount of tokens vested to them. And since then we've kind of merged to like both models, where we have around 25 full-time contributors who are paid in Index and some USDC. And then we have like a broader ecosystem of part-time contributors who essentially submit the work they've done every month. And that gets approved by like various working groups to pay them.
It's interesting. So like people are paid in Index tokens, essentially.
I think that's how you have to do it. Like if you want to scale like these networks, like you want to scale like ownership and equity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And they get paid a portion in USDC is how you guys are doing it now?
Yeah, it depends. Like, I am a governance token maximalist. Like I've only ever really been paid in the governance token. But you also have to be cognizant that people have like real lives and have to like pay bills and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. I wanted to bring something up. It's a little bit off topic, but I've noticed on your Twitter page something pop up recently, Serve DAO, which looks pretty cool. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? It seems like it just launched in the last week or so.
Yeah, I'm super hyped about Serve DAO. So, when I was first jumping into Web3, I was like very much wanted to like demarcate like my prior professional life with my crypto life. I was like, you know what? I'm a crypto bro now. I do tech. That part of my life is over, the military side. And then this winter, a couple guys reached out who were, talking about launching a DAO to onboard veterans into Web3. And that really struck a chord with me. I remembered, being in Hawaii, hearing my Marines talk about crypto, hearing them talk about, that opportunity. And I said, there's such a huge opportunity. Like there's so many young service people, 18 to 22, who I'm sure just incredibly excited about this space, but have no context, no place to like kind of really start their Web3 journey. So, we spent the last couple of months kind of sketching out what that looks like, and are in, the very early stages of launching it and starting to get the community really involved.
That's cool. So it's a place where veterans can come. They're around, other veterans and can all learn about Web3 and crypto together. Super neat.
Totally. And I mean, we're going to scale it beyond that. I mean, I think we're going to do a PFP to like NFT gate the community, ideally do a token launch in the next couple months, to be able to kind of like, use it. Like, tokens are just a coordination mechanism to be able to like coordinate all these veterans. And I think so. Like, a concept I think about a lot is like the idea of like supply side and demand side DAOs. And this is a idea that, is really kind of like the baby of Peter over at 1KX. And like, the idea is that, you have these kind of two different types of DAOs. So you have like a supply side DAO, which is like creating a product, right? And like supply side DAOs aren't that big, right? You can have 20, 30 people. And Index Coop is really a supply side DAO. Like, it creates products that people buy. But you also need demand side DAOs that, provide everything else for the ecosystem, like education, onboarding. Like, what do you buy in the ecosystem? What products do you support? Like, how do you get involved? And I see ServeDAO as being like a great example of the demand side DAO.
That is awesome.
Really cool. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, I spent a ton of time with close friends who were active duty and are now veterans up at like Fort Lewis McChord in the Seattle area. And like, I know for a fact, like, they're already crypto pilled, but they would totally glob on to ServeDAO. I'm also curious, like, for, non-veterans, is it something where you could engage already crypto pilled to like sponsor veterans, or sponsor, supporting a veteran to get involved? Like, have you thought about that?
Totally. I see it like, my goal is like, when I joined Index Coop, when I joined, when I, got really involved in the Ethereum ecosystem, like, I think we underestimate how technical it still is, right? Like, the majority of people who are really deep in this ecosystem are very technical people, or have like, a deep finance background, or they've just been in it so long, like, like you guys, that like, you just like kind of intuitively understand things. And, it's important that like we really start to break down these barriers and like really figure out like, hey, like, how do we make this space as like welcoming for people from all sorts of different backgrounds as possible? Because like, those are the people we need to take crypto from something that, a couple million people are really into something that like truly changes the world.
Totally. I think one thing that, Web3 has an appetite for, but hasn't quite materialized yet is on the community service and philanthropy side. And I would personally be stoked to get an opportunity or a platform to just speak to somebody who's, wants to get their feet wet, who hasn't taken the red pill yet. And I've got a community called Etherpy that I manage. It's just a Discord for people that are crypto curious and want to see where they can find a new DeFi opportunity, new yield farm, ask questions. But having an engaged and active audience is like something I would absolutely love to contribute to. So, that's something that you should think about incorporating, and certainly come back and hit me up if you're looking for speakers, or someone who can provide an anecdote about how to get involved and really make this kind of either a part-time hobby that helps them learn new skill sets and maybe make some money, or even go full-time.
100%. Like, Ace, what you're talking about like educating people and like bringing them on and having like a Discord, like there's so many people in the world that we need to reach, right? Like, there's millions and millions and millions of people, and like, we need as many communities that do education and do onboarding and like do outreach as humanly possible. I think something that we really, when you get really deep into crypto, you tend to just kind of talk to other people who are really deep as well. And you kind of lose this skill set of being able to like really simplify this technology and explain it in really understandable ways to like people who don't have that background. And we need more people who can educate. We need more people who can onboard. Like that's one of the biggest like shortfalls in crypto right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so incredibly grassroots. I don't really know why it is this way, but it's much more, I guess, comfortable for someone to get involved through someone they trust, versus say, there's this new app I can download and throw my money into it. It's a very, I guess perhaps it's because of the nascency of the industry, people still don't quite know if it's for real or trust that it's going to be around. So yeah, it's going to take that evangelizer personality and the grassroots movement to really kind of go full steam ahead into the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I try and like that's why I try and every time somebody reaches out on Twitter or Discord, like I always try and take the call with them, right? Like those are the most important like your most important call of the week isn't with, the partner at some like, crypto VC fund or like the founder of some protocol. The most important call of the week is with somebody who like just learned what Ethereum was last week and wants to learn more, because like that call like changes somebody's life.
Absolutely. Yep. Love it.
Yeah, man, it's very cool. I want to ask you, with your military background, like what parts of your experience in the Marines, are helping you think these days, or it's just an interesting juxtaposition, your past being in such a rigid hierarchical environment compared to the DAO structure, and whether that helps you now, or tell me how it's influenced you.
So like when I worked at the investment bank for that summer, I remember like, and I think anybody who's worked in a traditional organization can empathize with this. I remember feeling very strongly like I was like, this is cool, the people are smart, but this is literally just like the Marine Corps with money, right? Like it's the exact same structure. And I think these really rigid hierarchies, these really rigid organizations, like they're important. I see why they exist, but they're in many ways, they're like a holdover of the 20th century, where like we needed rigid hierarchy to like be able to, build things. Like we didn't have the technology to like truly decentralized decision making. We didn't have the technology to like build decentralized organizations. And now that we have that technology, it's like, of course we're going to do this. And that doesn't mean we just like leave all of the like lessons learned from, thousands of years of human organization, right? Like we're not going to just like eliminate hierarchy tomorrow because, we have this new way of organizing, which is DAOs. Like we're still going to be able to take some of those lessons learned, right? Like hierarchy is good in a lot of ways. It shows you who to pay attention to, whose voice to listen to. Like you take somebody who has 100,000 Twitter followers more seriously than somebody who has like 10 on, some specific topic. And like hierarchy is not 100% bad, but we just have to like rethink our relationship to hierarchy and like who is in that hierarchy and like what puts them at what level in that hierarchy. Like kind of going back to the resume thing that Ace was talking about, like what is a DAO resume? Like what puts you where on the hierarchy?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we definitely need hierarchies for sure. And I mean, I think it's the DAO structure is born out of this ability to, coordinate with other humans in such a rapidly more efficient manner than we were able to in the past. And I think that sort of breaks down the traditional hierarchy that we've, been dealing with and are more familiar with in the regular corporate world, maybe that existed and was built prior to there being an online world. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like the way I think about it is decentralization is really a way, it's like really the only technology we have for navigating like the complexity of the 21st century. So like when I think about that, like think about even 10 years ago in 2010, like 2000 or the early 2000s or the 90s, like the world is like 1,000x more complex today than it was, 10 years ago. And what we're really seeing today in modern society is we're seeing like the breakdown of like traditional organizations' ability to navigate that complexity. We're seeing like, hey, like these decision-making processes are so complex for modern organizations that like any one individual who's in charge of it is not going to have the ability to navigate that complexity. And the only way we're able to navigate that complexity is like through decentralized organizations that like split it up into a bunch of tiny, like manageable decisions that like independent groups can make that like coalesce into like a broader organizational decision making that's not like driven just by one individual.
That's like an excellent place, I think, to kind of to wind this down, Simon. And I'm like, I was going to ask you about what you think this space looks like in 5 years, but you're like already 5 years ahead mentally. And I think, you know, Big Sky 7 needs to become the philosopher. Ironically and actually, because, you know, I know that you did go to school for philosophy. But yeah, I guess any parting words, advice you have for listeners of the Deus Ex DAO? Would love to have you back sometime to say, you know, and hear about how things have progressed for you personally and with whatever's next. But I'll give you the floor.
So we are living through a world-changing revolution right now. Like the advent of Bitcoin, the advent of decentralized ledgers, like the ability to transfer value globally, like this is arguably the biggest technological revolution since like the Gutenberg press, like 500 years ago. Like this is going to change everything. And you know, when we're very focused sometimes in crypto on like the day-to-day, like what's happening, like trying to stay up to date, trying to catch up with the trends, trying to like figure out what the new hot thing is. And we never take the time to zoom out and say, hey, like we're changing the world forever. Like they will be writing history books about this time 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now. Like there will be people that will be listening to, you know, all these podcasts, all these things, you know, and this is like the cutting edge of the cutting edge. This is where the world is changing. And, you know, we can't take that lightly. Like we really have to embrace the mentality that like we're forever changing the world. Like this is a radical shift in human history. And like we need to hone in on like, how do we communicate that to people? How do we bring more people on board? How do we get this revolution as big as possible? How do we make it so it can change the lives of every single person on this planet? Like, do I believe in it personally enough to make those changes happen? And, you know, I think if I were to communicate anything to people listening to this podcast, it's that, like, you know, really take some time to zoom out and like think about this revolution, think about what it means, and think about like what it is going to take over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, over the next, you know, 5 decades to make this revolution a true reality and like shape human history forever.
Mic drop. Simon Judd, man, you're a legend. I appreciate you blessing us with your time. And
you guys are going to want to follow at BigSky_7 on Twitter.
That's right. Legend already, but even bigger legend in the making. Thank you so much, Simon. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you today, and we're very excited to have you as part of the crypto revolution. We'll be there with you every step of the way.
Thanks, guys. That was super fun. I hope you're hyped for 2022. We are all going to crush it so hard.
Love it, man. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, guys.